I want to introduce you to a man who, I don't know, is a friend, a brother, a father figure. I mean, he is really, truly a remarkable man and has truly changed my life. His name is Jon Huntsman, Sr. He has a brand new book out, Barefoot to Billionaire. And it is one of the most remarkable stories you have ever read. I will tell you, hello, Jon.
Hello, Glenn.
How are you?
Love you.
I will tell you that I just read a book from the 1800s. It was called Poor Boys, I think. And it was published about 1890, and it was all about the great industrial giants of the age that all grew up poor. And they just said, I'm just moving forward. I'm just going to move forward. We don't tell those stories anymore. You are the poster boy. You grew up in a place, in a house that had literally cardboard walls, right?
Yes.
You didn't have shoes for a while.
Well, not for a while.
Yeah, right. And then now you are the guy who made the styrofoam egg container, the styrofoam cup, plate. That's you. And when I went to your office, I don't know if you remember this. When I went to your office, you were trying to make, in the old days, you were trying to get the molds made for the McDonald's styrofoam.
Yes.
Okay. And you were having a hard time raising the money. And I saw up on your wall gold records. You want to tell that story real quick?
Well, it's not much of a story, Glenn. It's just that necessity is always the mother of invention. And when people say they don't have the money and they don't have the resources to enter business as an entrepreneur because they'd like to fulfill their dreams, I've always felt that there was some way, somehow, a methodology or a means by which people could attract financing. Because, and so one of my neighbors happened to be in Southern California, happened to be associated with one of the large record companies. And I came up with the idea that if we could advertise records on television, If You Act Now, remember those things that KTEL bought? Well, I started that strictly as a means to finance our petrochemical businesses. And I didn't think it would go anywhere, but it ended up being the 13th largest advertiser in America.
So just put this as perspective. Here I'm at this giant petrochemical plant, the guy who's making the styrofoam egg cartons and everything else. To fund that, he had no money, had nobody that would really believe in this. And so he started KTEL Records, where you put together all the greatest hits of all time. That's him.
Well, they were the greatest hits of rock and roll, Glenn. That was one thing.
I mean, that's crazy.
21 out of our first 23 records were gold labels. And so I quickly sold that business after 3 or 4 years to CBS.
I'm in the record business. I've never done that.
Well, I was afraid I was going to build a balloon, and then you'd pop the balloon and you wouldn't have anything. But I knew in the chemical business that everything we wear, see, feel, and touch, from carpeting to computers to medical supplies to pharmaceuticals, to paint, to seats for cars and where you're sitting now, to thousands and thousands of products could be made if I could just diversify and move into these broader products with a wonderful team of people. And I learned very early, Glenn, by the way, that the key to success is to surround yourself with people who are a lot smarter than you are. And I knew my limitations in engineering and some of the other areas, but we were able to start, and not many people thought we would make it, and this year we celebrate our 45th anniversary at about $16 billion a year in sales.
That's amazing.
So I'm grateful to the Lord. I'll tell you, Glenn, it's hard for me to even talk about it, but I've always been strong in my faith, and I've had faith in other people. And if people know you have faith in them and you can put your arm around them and thank them for what they're doing and then share your profits with them and share your profits with charity at the same time, is a formula for great success.
Most people, Jon, will look at stock and they say, I've got to make this stock price. You do the opposite. You look at your charitable givings. You went to the banks. Was it 2008?
2008 and 9, yes.
And you went to the banks And when everybody else was losing money and stock and everything was just cratering, you're about to lose your company.
Right.
And you have all of these commitments to women's shelters and everything else. Tell the story about going to the bank.
Well, you know, once one makes a commitment to charity, the last people in the world who can afford to ever be without are those who are already without. And so as a boy growing up, I knew the feeling of being poor. I'd lived that. I'd worn those moccasins. And my wife and I agreed that if ever we were going to make a commitment, and often commitments have to be made for 5 or 10 years. They're not just a one-year situation. And many of our commitments were 50 million or 100 million. They were going to different causes, mostly cancer, but a lot of other great causes.
A lot of other.
So I went to the banks in New York and I said, I really need a high-powered loan. And they said, for your business? And I said, no, for charity. They said, we don't loan money for charity. Nobody's foolish enough to borrow money so they can give it away. How do you intend to repay us? And I said, well, my businesses will grow and we will flourish and we will be successful. But you just have to give me time, but I will not let these people down. They're counting on me for food. They're counting on me for cancer treatments. They're counting on us for abused women and children centers. They're counting on me for 5,000 scholarships to underprivileged kids who, you know, if it hadn't been for family, I wouldn't have been through school. And so the bankers they were so astounded that the chairman said, I'll have to think about it. And then he sent the vice chairman all the way out west to visit with me to try to talk me out of it. And I said, don't you dare talk me out of it. I will pay you back every dime, every penny, but I will not let these charities down. And so, Glenn, it was a great blessing.
You put your personal stuff up as collateral.
Oh, all my net worth, absolutely. Because I figure that, you know, Glenn, you're born with not much in life. Most of us don't have a whole lot when we're born. And I figured that if I died without a whole lot, I'd break even. That's a pretty good record. and so it didn't bother me in the slightest. So we'd put up our corporate stock. I put up one of my homes, and my wife and children. The bank wouldn't give me any collateral on those. But it worked out great. I'm not trying to sound self-serving. I'm not trying to be that kind at all. All I'm saying is that, you know, whether we're worth $1 billion, whether we're worth $1 million, whether we're worth 100,000, whether we're worth 1,000, it's what's in your heart. You know, $100 a month from somebody, or $50 a year for people who may be in a less economic bracket. That's as important to the Lord. It's important to those people receiving charity as it is for the billionaires and millionaires to take. In fact, it's worth more. And I would suggest, Glenn, that there's probably more money per capita given by the lower income and middle income than these extremely wealthy people who I've had the privilege to associate with, who don't give much of anything.
You have, and I won't tell the story, you can if you choose to, but I know for a fact you have been with some of the biggest current entrepreneurs in the world. And yeah, because you don't, I would say yelled at them, but they know you spoke softly but sternly to them and said, what are you thinking?
Well, the rule was in this little group that they put together of successful men and women that we're all supposed to give 50% to charity. So I stood up in the back of the room and I said, do you mind, and I won't mention any names, but we know who they all are. They're good people, and they've given a lot to charity, many of them, but most of them haven't given a dime. And I said, why don't we make our goal 80% instead of 50%? Because if you're worth $5 billion, you can easily live on $2.5 billion. I mean, you're not going to go broke. And so give 80%, and then you live on the 20, and you're still extremely wealthy. And the chairman of our group, Mr. Buffett, who's really a fine man, he said, John, sit down. We're not ready for that yet. You're way ahead of the curve. But anyway, my feeling is, you know, the twinkle in people's eye, the feelings in their face, the hope in their body that you can give people by lifting their souls and lifting their spirits, it doesn't cost that much. And besides, what are we going to do with it anyway? You know, we've been blessed. The Lord's blessed us in a way that we can never, ever say thank you.
I want to introduce Jon to somebody who I met walking in. Jon, you stay here for a second. I'm going to give this, I just had this signed. to Ruth and Gary from Jon. Okay? Jon, they watched you on Fox, on my show on Fox.
Thank you very much.
Ruth, will you tell me quickly your story?
Our daughter had ovarian cancer, and at the time we were watching the show was 12 years a survivor, and then she developed breast cancer. Only child and no grandchildren, and our lawyers insisted that we come up with a secondary survivor. What am I trying to
Beneficiary.
And we prayed about it, thought about it, and we went with the Cancer Institute because of you.
You're in their
on
will.
his show.
Thank you.
You're in
And
their
the
will. And they didn't know you were here today. And I'm walking
I
in
didn't
and I
even
said,
know when he announced it.
yeah.
And you know, one of your young men told us outside, I told him how hard the time I had of getting here, and he said, God wanted you to be here today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you
And
very
at
much.
that time, I still didn't know it was
Yeah.
Jon Huntsman.
Isn't that amazing?
Ruth, would you
And
be
I am a reader, so
would you be kind enough if I just borrowed that book 1 second from you, if you could just bring it over to me? I just wanted
Here.
to share with. I'll give it right back to you, Ruth. Thank you, dear.
Yeah.
I think there's a little passage in this book that Glenn will probably never have me back again on a show, but you know
No, don't do it. Don't.
But I'm
You
gonna do
made
it.
a promise to me.
I know, but I'm just breaking it. Glenn is one of the finest men I've ever met. He's more than a brother. He's one of the truly great and gifted Americans, and his beautiful wife Tanya and his children, whom I know so well. But this is what I said in my book about Glenn. Talk show host Glenn Beck, a tremendous cheerleader in the cancer fight, who has raised millions of dollars during his time with CNN, Fox News, and now GBTV. His commitment to help us solve the staggering mysteries of this dreaded disease is second to none. He has been to Huntsman Cancer Institute several times. He believes the food served there is the best in America.
I have a food expert.
I agree. Our patients deserve nothing but the best. They are served their meals any time they feel inclined to eat, morning, noon, or night. Beck is a big picture guy. His often controversial stands on political issues notwithstanding, he has a huge charitable heart. Just one of the passages in the book.
Jon,
Ruth, I'll give it back to you.
I will tell you that when I first met him, and I've told this story before, when I first met him, I saw what he was doing, and more importantly, he stood at the door of the cancer center and he said, we're going to cure cancer. And when somebody like him says, we're going to cure cancer, I believed him. And I still believe him. And we're close. We are really, really close. And all we have to do is just, if we have extra, give it. Let me change gears.
Good.
You were talking about, what do we have? There's a lot of people that will say, I don't have anything. I don't have anything. Or big businessmen who are just holding on to the edge, and they'll say, I can't afford to give right now. I'll give later. It's a really hard concept to get people to understand. Give first, and you receive. And
That's right.
It's not necessarily monetary that you receive back, but it's good stuff.
It's good stuff.
Talk to somebody who's a businessman or somebody who's struggling.
Well, let me just put it in two parts, if I may, Glenn. Number one, I've always felt that people who leave a big will or leave all their money in a will, if they knew they were going to live forever, they wouldn't give anything, because they give it after they die. The great joy in life is to give it while you're alive. When Karen and I were first married, we made $320 a month as a young naval officer, and I paid my tithing on that. And then every month, $50 was missing from a fairly modest paycheck, and I think she had unusual suspicions. Let me put it that way. And we've got 9 children and 56 grandchildren now. But one day she said, "I'm missing $50 every month." And I said, "Sweetheart, I don't know where that went. We'll have to go back to the payer's office and see what's happening to this. And about 6 months later, this lady came to our door, tears in her eyes, and she said, I know that we make more money than you do, but we have 6 children, and we're struggling, and we've had this serious illness in our family, and your husband's been slipping $50 a month under my door. And my wife cried for a week. And I don't say that again self-serving. I mean, we couldn't afford then to pay much money out. But, you know, it's something that kind of starts young. It's not something that older people kind of say, well, I think I'm going to start giving. I've now made it. It's something that just $5 a month. I mean, even someone who's down and out, and if they can give $5 a month to, whether it's Catholic Charities, whether it's the church of your choice, whether it's a Salvation Army, whatever it is that you know is a good cause, it just lifts your spirits. It does something for you. It's a twinkling of an eye. And I remember the night before I went in for prostate cancer, I put my children in the car and I said, we're going to make several stops on the way to the hospital. And they said, oh, come on, Dad, you don't need to stop and get a milkshake or a hamburger or anything. This thing won't be that bad. Well, the first stop was to the homeless center, and we gave them $1 million. They just about died. And then I went over to St. Vincent de Paul, a Catholic relief organization that serves food at lunch, to Father Moore. And I said, Father, I want you to have this little check. And he read it, and he said, you know, I've never had a $100 check before. He forgot to read all the zeros behind it. And about 2 months later, he came up when I was recuperating from cancer, and he said, John, I've never seen anything like that. Then I went over to one other hospital who had helped find cancer and gave them quite a bit. And then I went in and had my cancer, one of 4 that I've now had. But you know, I just knew I was going to get through it all. It was just such a blessing to our family to be able to have them share that special day with us.
You have died 3 times?
Well,
right? You've been dead on the operating table twice, 3 times?
I guess they could say 2 or 3 times.
2 or 3 times. Why count after 1?
That's right.
Really. You've had cancer
4 times.
You suffer from an extraordinarily painful disease.
Yes.
And have been suffering from this for how long?
7 years.
What gets you out of bed? There's a woman right now who is 29 years old, I think. She has brain cancer, and she said at the day after my husband's birthday, we've decided I'm going to take my own life. And she's checking out. Now, she's not even in pain yet. And she got the medicine, you know, the poison from the doctors to do it in Oregon. And I thought of you today because you've been down that road over and over and over again.
Well, you know, Glenn, prescription drugs, many kinds of prescription drugs, and other devices can drive a lot of really nice, thoughtful, gracious, warm-hearted people into a state of mind where it's not them that's acting, it's their drugs that's acting.
It's her family agrees with her.
And yet, if there's some way that they can just bring themselves, we can bring ourselves to think of other people, can think, see, whenever I really get down and out and think, well, you know, I have no immune system and my joints are all gone now. And Glenn and I have been talking about some of these things, and I just go over to the chemotherapy ward. We have the largest one in the world at Huntsman Cancer Institute, and I shake hands with these people. I put my arms around them, and I give them a hug, and I thank the Lord for my good health. And it's the greatest spirit in the world to just go into a place where people are really, really suffering, and they have no chance of making it. And that gives us tremendous spirit, tremendous will, and no doctor can ever give you a medication that will beat something like that.
You were in the Nixon administration. Tell the story of, I think it was Haldeman, wasn't it?
Yes.
That called you in to his office and told you to do something underhanded.
Well, serving with President Nixon, I have to say right up front, was a great honor, Glenn. He opened relationships with the People's Republic of China. He brought home the prisoners. He started the strategic arms limitations talks with the Russians, which really opened the whole era for Reagan to then bring down the wall. And above all else, on December 23rd, 1971, he signed the war on cancer. And I was able to get one of the pins because I was at that ceremony. My mother had just passed away of breast cancer. But he had a chief of staff by the name of HR. HR stood for Harry Robbins, which he did not like. So he picked up the name Bob. We all know him in the history books as Bob Haldeman. And Bob, in fairness to him, in later years we became good friends, but during the time he was in the White House, it was a zero defect system. I don't know how many of you have ever lived under a zero defect system, but it's an impossibility because none of us is perfect, and we can't live under that kind of a system. But he demanded that at the White House, and that every time he would ask one of the subordinates, and I was an assistant to the president and the president's staff secretary, and one day he called me in and asked if I would go out to California and do some work on one of the political oppositions because we had a facility out there. And I said, of course I will, Bob. I'll do anything to help the president. And you know, my mental framework hadn't cooked on, my mental compass. You know, we all have this compass inside of our heart that tells us whether it's right or wrong. It's kind of an ethical thing. And right away I went out to California. Within 24 hours I met with one of our top people out there, and I said, we need to have some work done on the opposition party out there so I can return to Bob and respond to it, because that's the way politics is played. And right in the middle of it, I said, Jim, he was our plant manager out there, I want to apologize to you for coming out here. I don't know what happened to me, but my moral compass did not kick in. I'm going to go back to Haldeman and tell him that I will have no part of this, and I'm so sorry that I even met with you. Forget anything I've said. I went back and met with Bob. I thought I was going to be fired, which I told him would be fine. He's free to do that. But I went back and said, Bob, I can't do this. I just cannot do it, and I will not do it. And believe it or not, Glenn, they moved me up a notch to become part of the president's inner cabinet. I mean, not a cabinet member, but inner staff is what I'm trying to say, because I think they couldn't quite figure me out, and there was a sense of respect.
Well, when they were doing the hearings, you were the only one that wasn't called to testify.
There were two of us, two special assistants. They didn't qualify. Well, they did call me to ask me, Glenn, and this will take just a minute, but they tracked me down. Our family was just moving from Washington out to Salt Lake City, and they called me out, and they tracked us down at a Holiday Inn in Rockport, Illinois, right on the border there. Yeah. And Scott Armstrong was the assistant to Sam Dash. Remember that name? He was the lead counsel for the Democrats who were trying to nail Nixon, which, you know, he and his staff should have. They all got what they deserved because they lied under oath, and that's perjury. But he called and said, John, we need you to come back here to testify because we know that you know about the secret recordings. Of course, being the president's staff secretary, I didn't know a thing about them. They'd forgotten to tell me. And they said, we need you back here to testify, and we need you tomorrow. And I said, well, I'm driving all my kids back home. And he said, well, can you make it Monday morning at the latest? And I said, I can, but I want to talk about a couple of other things while I'm there. One of them is all of the Golden Boss stationery that LBJ's daughters had the White House pay for just before they left. It was personal stationery. The second thing I want to talk about is the $4.5 million runway that LBJ had put in his ranch after he announced he wasn't going to run. He announced it on March 31st, as you may remember, before the election. And it cost the taxpayers $4.5 million. And I said the third thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that I've been over the Cuban refugee program since I left HEW. I was part of Reagan's team to put in his type of welfare, which is people should work for what they get in California. And so Reagan had me over welfare before I came to the White House. But I said I want to talk about the Bay of Pigs, because we lost thousands of lives of great honorable Cuban Americans, and it was all done because at the last minute Bobby Kennedy had convinced John Kennedy that they shouldn't send in any arms, planes, and yet we'd forgotten to tell the Cubans about it. And they were just slaughtered by the Cuban army. And I said, the American public needs to know some of these things. And so they said, well, Mr. Huntsman, we'll be in touch with you, and we'll look forward to having you to the Senate Watergate hearings. I'm still waiting, Glenn. Haven't heard a word.
Let me just close up because we've only got about 2 minutes now. But I want to tell you that Tanya and I make donations to the Huntsman Cancer Institute because I've been there several times. I've seen it, and I can testify to you. This is the real deal. These guys will cure cancer, and it is the best. The best. I don't care if you have to drag me in a burlap bag to get me to this hospital if I ever have cancer, but that's where I want to be. But it is well worth your time, even if it's $5 a month, and you can find out more online. Real quick, we were talking in the break about, quite honestly, about the atonement, about forgiving yourself of mistakes that you have made. That's harder, I think, for some people than thinking that God will forgive me. It's I have to forgive me, and people have a hard time with that.
They really do, Glenn. And you know, we all are suffering from some form of problem. Every family. Now, our family, excuse me, I lost a daughter. She had 7 children. She was 44 years of age. It broke my heart. I mean, we've all had these kind of tragedies. Sometimes it's health, sometimes it's finances, sometimes it's divorce, sometimes it's children who pass away or get deathly sick. And what Glenn and I were talking about, and it's so important, is we do not forgive ourselves. We carry around this heavy bag of rocks over our shoulders, and we think, I can never forgive myself because I did something wrong with one of my children. I did something wrong to my parents. I made a mistake at work and got fired or got laid off. I made a mistake with a wife or a husband. And you know, it's so critical that we forgive ourselves because the Savior set up the atonement. And the atonement was, let me take upon myself the sins of man. And if I can take upon myself his sins, then the number one job we have to do is heal. We have to heal ourselves. And the best way to heal ourselves is to forgive ourselves. And I've always thought of that. Every time there's been a heartache in our family, my brother just died of pancreatic cancer. My daughter left these little 7 children that we're raising in addition to our 9. But I keep thinking over and over is Glenn. And Glenn's a great example for me. I want to tell you, he has a beautiful family.
Stop, we're running out of time.
He's one of the greatest human beings on the face of the earth. And we were just talking, and we were both in total agreement that if we will forgive ourselves and move on, there will be less suicides, there will be less illnesses, we'll be happier, but we have to understand, because of the Savior's atonement, we're free to forget what we're doing,
start all over again,
and forgive ourselves, Glenn.
Jon Huntsman, the name of the book, Barefoot to Billionaire. It's available everywhere. Every dime goes to charity, goes to the Huntsman Cancer Institute. Jon, truly one of my life's honor to know you.
It's my life's honor, Glenn. I love you, dear friend.
I love you too.